Hey, traveler. Tonight, I thought we'd talk about what it might be like to wake up as a Victorian woman in 1860. Where are you in the world right now? And what time is it there? Let me know in the comments. It's wonderful to know where our fellow travelers are joining us from tonight. What would you do if you suddenly awoke in a world utterly alien to your own? Imagine the disorientation, the sheer panic of finding yourself in 1860, a Victorian woman ripped from the comfort of the 21st century. It's like waking up on Mars, but with more petticoats. The first sensation would be wrongness. The bed itself, likely a four-poster affair, draped in heavy fabrics, a far cry from your memory foam mattress. The air thick with the scent of coal smoke and something vaguely floral, potpourri perhaps, and then the clothing, or rather, the feeling of it, layers upon layers of constricting fabric, culminating in the corset. Oh, the corset. If you've ever felt a bit squeezed after Thanksgiving dinner, multiply that by 10 and add whalebone. This isn't just uncomfortable, it's a declaration of your place, your role. You are a Victorian woman, defined by propriety and shaped, quite literally, by the expectations of society. Imagine trying to explain to them what yoga pants are. Good luck. The initial panic would be overwhelming. Where are you? Who are you? The room itself offers clues. Is it opulent, filled with mahogany furniture and velvet drapes? Or is it more modest, with simple floral wallpaper and a washstand? The quality of the furnishing speaks volumes about your assumed social standing. Are there servants bustling about? Or do you hear the distant murmur of a family breakfast? The answers to these questions dictate your immediate survival strategy. Because let's face it, you're not just in a different time, you're in a different role. Speaking of roles, the societal expectations would hit you like a runaway train. Forget casual conversation, independent thought, and any semblance of personal freedom as you know it. Your value is largely tied to your marriage prospects and your ability to manage a household. Try explaining your career aspirations as a software engineer. The sounds alone would be jarring. The clip-clop of horses' hooves on cobblestone streets, the cries of street vendors hawking their wares, the relentless tick-tock of a grandfather clock, measuring out your days in a world of rigid social structure. Long before Spotify playlists, your daily soundscape is dictated by the rhythms of 19th century life. Now that we've covered the initial shock, let's talk about the corset. The corset deserves its own paragraph, possibly its own chapter. It's not just an article of clothing, it's a symbol of the era. It's a physical manifestation of the constraints placed upon women, a constant reminder of their limited agency. It's like wearing a permanent hug from someone who doesn't want you to breathe. But what good is a corset without societal expectations? Actually, it's probably still just awful. Victorian society dictated a strict code of conduct for women. Silence was preferred to intelligent discussion. Modesty was valued above all else. Your education, while possibly including accomplishments like playing the piano or speaking French, was primarily geared towards making you a more desirable wife. Try arguing for equal pay in that environment. The clashes would be immediate and constant. Your modern sensibilities, your ingrained sense of equality, your expectation of personal autonomy, all of these would be at odds with the Victorian worldview. Something as simple as expressing an opinion too forcefully could be considered unladylike, even scandalous. Imagine trying to explain the concept of feminism. From social expectations to the suffocating undergarments, waking up as a Victorian woman in 1860 would be a rude and disorienting awakening. The sensory overload, the stifling social norms, and the sheer culture shock would be enough to send anyone spiraling. It's a world of rigid rules and limited choices, a far cry from the freedoms and opportunities we often take for granted today. Key takeaway: the initial transition would be a sensory and social assault, forcing a rapid and uncomfortable adjustment to a vastly different reality.
Imagine waking up, not to the gentle glow of a phone screen, but to the dim light filtering through heavy curtains. Not a digital alarm, but the distant clatter of a milk cart. And instead of reaching for your favorite pajamas, you find yourself encased in layers of stiff fabric. What would you do if you found yourself a Victorian woman in 1860? The immediate shock wouldn't just be the unfamiliar clothes, it would be the invisible cage, the social constraints that defined a woman's existence. If you've ever felt pressured to conform to societal expectations, multiply that feeling tenfold. Long before women fought for equal rights, the Victorian era presented a very specific, very limited script for the female sex. Forget about career aspirations beyond governess or teacher. A woman's primary purpose was to marry, have children, and maintain a respectable household. Think of it as a perpetual performance where every action was scrutinized and judged. What acceptable hobbies would she be allowed to engage in? Painting watercolors of flowers? Acceptable. Scientific experiments in the garden shed? Scandalous. It was a world of shoulds and shouldn'ts, a delicate dance around societal expectations. You might even wish for that modern, chaotic lifestyle. The limited education opportunities would also be a rude awakening. While some upper-class women received a basic education focused on etiquette, needlepoint, and perhaps a smattering of French, serious intellectual pursuits were largely discouraged. Knowledge, after all, might make a woman question her place. But what good is etiquette without the legal rights to back it up? Speaking of which, prepare for a legal system that essentially treated you as property. Married women couldn't own property, sign contracts, or even control their own earnings. Divorce was incredibly difficult to obtain, and even if you managed it, custody of your children almost always went to the father. The difference between modern legal rights and those of a Victorian woman was stark. Sure, it wasn't perfect modern day, but at least there was recourse to legal avenues. Now that we've covered the legal constraints, let's talk about the societal expectations. The angel in the house. This ideal, popularized by Coventry Patmore's poem, painted women as pure, selfless creatures, devoted to their husbands and children. They were expected to be morally superior, spiritually uplifting, and utterly devoid of worldly ambition. The angel in the house was basically a saint in a corset. The reality, of course, was far more complex. Many women chafed under these restrictions, finding ways to exert influence and express themselves within the confines of their roles. Some became involved in philanthropic work, advocating for social reforms. Others found solace in friendships, forming close bonds with other women who understood their struggles. But medieval people didn't have TikTok to air their grievances. From philanthropy to needlepoint, medieval life required both outward compliance and inner rebellion. The difference was the lack of public platforms. Sure, it wasn't perfect, but when your alternative was silence, a quiet act of defiance suddenly looked brilliant. Key takeaway: the angel in the house was a cage, but some women learned to rattle the bars. What about the acceptable hobbies or activities? Well, painting, drawing, and playing musical instruments were all considered ladylike pursuits. So was needlework, which provided both a creative outlet and a useful skill. Reading was also acceptable, but only if the books were deemed suitable for a young lady. No scandalous novels, please. Think Jane Austen, not the Kama Sutra. But picture this situation. You, a modern woman with a thirst for knowledge and a penchant for breaking rules, suddenly confined to a world where your worth is measured by your ability to attract a husband and produce offspring. How would you feel about the rigid gender roles compared to modern society? It would be infuriating, wouldn't it? You'd probably want to stage a protest. Ever wonder about the hypocrisy of the era? While women were expected to be paragons of virtue, men often indulged in behaviors that were considered unacceptable for women. Double standards abounded, creating a world where appearances often masked a more complex and often uncomfortable reality. Think secret affairs, gambling debts, and other forms of moral laxity. Basically, Victorian society was like a carefully iced cake hiding a slightly rotten center. The societal pressure to marry was immense. Unmarried women were often seen as spinsters, pitied, or even ostracized. Marriage was the key to social and economic security, but it also meant surrendering a significant amount of personal autonomy. Medieval women also yearned for companionship, but without dating apps. The difference was the desperation. Sure, it wasn't perfect, but when your alternative was social pariahdom, a rushed marriage suddenly looked brilliant. Now that we've covered the societal pressures, let's talk about the internal conflicts faced by women of the time. Many women struggled to reconcile their own desires and ambitions with the expectations placed upon them. They yearned for intellectual stimulation, for meaningful work, for a sense of purpose beyond the domestic sphere. It was a constant battle between conformity and self-expression, like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole while wearing a corset. Speaking of internal conflicts, this brings us to the subtle forms of rebellion that some women engaged in. Some used their wit and intelligence to subtly challenge societal norms. Others found ways to express their creativity through writing, art, or music, even if they had to do it in secret. And some simply defied expectations by remaining unmarried, choosing independence over the constraints of marriage. But medieval people didn't have online forums to share their subversive ideas. The difference was the lack of support networks. Sure, it wasn't perfect, but when your alternative was isolation, a clandestine book club suddenly looked brilliant. Key takeaway: Victorian women navigated a world of constraints, but they also found ways to resist and redefine their roles. Imagine the frustration of knowing that you possess talents and abilities that you are not allowed to fully utilize, the stifled ambition, the unspoken desires, the constant pressure to conform. It would be enough to drive anyone mad. From conformity to rebellion, medieval life required both outward compliance and inner defiance. The difference was the scale of consequences. Sure, it wasn't perfect, but when your alternative was societal ruin, a whispered insult suddenly looked brilliant. The emphasis is on understanding the social constraints and internal conflicts faced by women of the time. But what good are constraints without some coping mechanisms? Women found solace in various activities. Friendships with other women were vital, offering emotional support and a sense of shared experience. Religion provided comfort and a framework for understanding their place in the world. And of course, there was always the escape of a good book, even if it had to be hidden beneath the floorboards. But medieval women didn't have streaming services to binge watch. The difference was the self-sufficiency required. Sure, it wasn't perfect, but when your alternative was boredom, a carefully cultivated friendship suddenly looked brilliant. The confines of the Victorian woman were real, but so was their resilience. They navigated a gendered world with grace, wit, and a quiet determination to make the best of their limited circumstances. And maybe, just maybe, they laid the groundwork for the freedoms that women enjoy today. Imagine waking up, not to the chirping of a digital alarm, but to the insistent clanging of a downstairs bell. Sunlight, filtered through heavy velvet curtains, barely illuminates a room filled with dark, imposing furniture. This isn't your life. It's 1860s England, Victorian England. Your new reality is defined by rigid social expectations. Forget pajamas. You're swathed in a stiff, high-necked nightgown. Forget a quick coffee. and scrolling through your phone. Your day begins with a servant helping you dress in layers of petticoats, a corset that restricts your breathing, and a voluminous dress. What's worse, you may be at the bottom of the family pecking order. The family. Ah, yes, your new family. Perhaps you find yourself in the home of a prosperous merchant with a stern, patriarchal father figure who expects unquestioning obedience. Perhaps your mother is a woman of delicate constitution, prone to fainting spells and ever anxious about appearances. Or maybe you are living with someone less fortunate. Maybe you are living with an abusive family or a terrible spouse. Who knows what they will do or force you to do? Social calls are the currency of this era. The women of the house, the ones not busy managing the household, spend a significant portion of their time visiting or receiving visitors. These are not casual chats. They are highly structured rituals, governed by an unspoken code of etiquette. A calling card left at the door, a specific time allotted for a visit, conversation carefully chosen to avoid controversial topics. What would your friends think if they saw you now? Afternoon tea is another cornerstone of Victorian social life. Picture delicate china, cucumber sandwiches with the crusts removed, and endless cups of tea poured with precise movements. It's a performance of gentility, a display of social grace. But beneath the surface, tensions simmer. Gossip is exchanged, alliances are formed, and reputations are carefully constructed or subtly undermined. Now that we've mentioned the upper class, we need to consider the lower class. They would have a much different standard of living and less social interaction. Courtship in 1860 was a minefield of unspoken desires and societal constraints. Romantic love was often secondary to social standing and financial security. Arranged marriages, while not always explicitly dictated, were certainly encouraged. A young woman's primary goal was to secure a suitable husband who could provide for her and her future children. Forget swiping right. Your future happiness depends on navigating a complex web of social expectations and family pressure. And your own reputation is on the line in every exchange. The roles within the family were strictly defined. Men were the breadwinners, the decision-makers, the public figures. Women were relegated to the domestic sphere, responsible for managing the household, raising children, and maintaining the family's social standing. But what if you want to be an inventor, a scientist, or something not ladylike? Class structure permeated every aspect of Victorian life. The wealthy lived in grand houses with numerous servants, indulging in lavish lifestyles. The working class struggled to make ends meet, often living in crowded, unsanitary conditions. Your place in this hierarchy dictated your opportunities, your prospects, and even your life expectancy. The rules are different, but sadly, some things never change. Secrets lurked beneath the veneer of Victorian respectability. Affairs, illegitimate children, financial troubles. These were all carefully concealed behind closed doors. Maintaining a facade of propriety was paramount, even if it meant sacrificing personal happiness or moral integrity. Imagine being trapped in a gilded cage, forced to uphold an image that bears no resemblance to reality. And how much more difficult would it be without modern conveniences? Healthcare in the 1860s was rudimentary by modern standards. Germ theory was still in its infancy, and medical practices were often based on superstition and misinformation. Childbirth was particularly dangerous for women, with a high risk of complications and death. Diseases like cholera, typhoid, and tuberculosis were rampant, posing a constant threat to public health. Forget antibiotics. Your fate rests on the skill of the local physician and the strength of your own immune system. You might not be very fortunate at all. Victorian family life was a complex tapestry woven with threads of love, duty, social pressure, and hidden secrets. It was a world of rigid expectations and limited opportunities, particularly for women. To survive in this era, you would need to adapt quickly, learn the rules of the game, and find ways to navigate the constraints of your new reality. And maybe, just maybe, you might even find a way to thrive. But what good is wealth without health? Key takeaway: Victorian society was a rigid structure where appearances often masked hidden truths, and individual freedom was a rare commodity. Now that we've covered the complexities of family and society, let's delve into some specific aspects of a Victorian woman's daily life. What about your clothes? How on earth can you function in those things? The clock ticks softly, a sound perhaps alien to a woman waking in 1860s England. Imagine the abrupt shift: no electric lights, no central heating, just the chill seeping through the cracks of a poorly insulated dwelling. If you were fortunate, you might find yourself in a comfortable townhouse, but more likely, the grimy reality of an industrial city would press in. What would you do? The Industrial Revolution, while bringing unprecedented advancements, cast a long, dark shadow, particularly over the lives of women. Think of modern cities struggling with pollution. Now amplify that tenfold. Add horse-drawn carriages churning up dust and grime, and imagine factories belching out coal smoke day and night. The air itself would feel heavy, acrid, a constant assault on your senses. For women of means, life wasn't all drawing room dances and afternoon tea. While they may have been shielded from the worst excesses, the awareness of the suffering around them gnawed. Charitable work became a social obligation, a way to ease the conscience, but also a genuine effort to improve the lot of the less fortunate. The problem? Social conventions severely limited their options. A lady couldn't simply roll up her sleeves and start cleaning streets or organizing protests. Now that we've painted a picture of the upper echelons, let's descend into the heart of the industrial machine. Picture the factories, vast and echoing, filled with the relentless clang and clatter of machinery. The air is thick with dust, lint, and the constant threat of accidents. Here, women and children toiled for long hours, often in dangerous conditions, for a pittance. Consider sweatshops today. Now remove safety regulations, child labor laws, and add a layer of Victorian moral judgment. The work was relentless, the pay abysmal. Women often earned significantly less than men, even for the same tasks. This disparity was justified by the prevailing social belief that women were less capable and that their primary role was in the home, regardless of the fact that many women were the primary breadwinners for their families. Speaking of social injustices, this brings us to the slums. These overcrowded, disease-ridden areas were breeding grounds for poverty, crime, and despair. The environmental impact of this unchecked industrial growth was devastating. Rivers became open sewers, the air choked with pollutants, and disease was rampant. Cholera, typhoid, and other waterborne illnesses were common, particularly in the slums. The lack of sanitation and proper waste disposal created a perfect storm for disease to thrive. Consider also that early photography captured the gloom, forever preserving the visual of the environmental impact. But what good is identifying a problem without seeking a solution? The Victorian era also saw the rise of social reform movements dedicated to alleviating the suffering of the working class. Individuals like Octavia Hill worked to improve housing conditions, while others campaigned for better working conditions and education. These reformers faced enormous challenges, battling entrenched interests and widespread apathy. Key takeaway: the Victorian era's industrial boom came at a steep human and environmental cost, particularly for women and the working class. Now that we've explored the harsh realities of industrial life, let's consider the moral and ethical dilemmas faced by women of means. Many were genuinely concerned about the plight of the poor, but felt constrained by social expectations and a lack of political power. They may have engaged in charitable work, but often within the confines of what was deemed appropriate for a lady. Think of modern debates about corporate social responsibility. The question then, as now, was how to reconcile personal comfort with social justice. The rise of industrial cities also had a profound impact on the family structure. Many families were forced to migrate from rural areas to seek work in the factories. This often led to the breakdown of traditional family roles and increased pressure on women to contribute to the household income. Child labor became widespread, with children as young as 5 or 6 working long hours in dangerous conditions. From broken families to polluted air, what are some other side effects that many people overlooked? The lack of education for working-class women further exacerbated their vulnerability. Without basic literacy and numeracy skills, they were easily exploited and had limited opportunities for advancement. Education was seen as a privilege, not a right, and girls were often denied the same educational opportunities as boys. Now, speaking of education, this brings us to the gradual but significant changes that were beginning to occur. The Victorian era also saw the rise of the feminist movement, which challenged traditional gender roles and demanded greater rights and opportunities for women. Women like Millicent Fawcett and Emmeline Pankhurst campaigned tirelessly for women's suffrage, education, and property rights. The fight for women's rights was a long and arduous one, but it laid the foundation for the progress that would be made in the 20th century. The women who dared to challenge the status quo faced ridicule, opposition, and even violence, but they persevered in their pursuit of a more just and equitable society. Key takeaway? Despite the challenges, the Victorian era saw the seeds of social reform and the rise of the feminist movement, paving the way for future progress. From factory floors to drawing rooms, the Victorian era presented women with a complex tapestry of opportunities and constraints. Waking up in 1860 as a woman would mean navigating a world of stark contrasts, where privilege and poverty existed side by side, and where the fight for equality was just beginning. It would be a world of grime and gaslight, of social expectations and simmering rebellion, a world that demanded both resilience and compassion. The fire crackles softly in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the walls. It feels like only yesterday I arrived here, a stranger flung into a world both familiar from books and utterly alien in its daily realities. Or perhaps it was a lifetime ago. Time has a funny way of blurring, doesn't it? Especially when lived in such stark contrast to what you knew before. If you've ever stared into the embers of a dying fire and felt the weight of the world settle upon your shoulders, you might understand a fraction of what it's like to straddle 2 centuries. The ghost of my old life flickers at the edges of my memory. The internet, cars, the sheer speed of modern existence. Like trying to grasp smoke, isn't it? But it's there, a phantom limb of a past that feels increasingly distant. Remember the first time I struggled with the corset? It feels absurd now. Initially, I think I was more offended than uncomfortable. I may have made some comparisons to a badly designed straitjacket. But now it's just expected. Another layer of the onion, that is conformity. I see the women around me, accepting their roles, their limitations, but I also see the glimmers of discontent, the quiet rebellions brewing beneath the surface, the seeds of change, barely visible, but undeniably there. Now that we've experienced the struggles of navigating Victorian society, let's consider the quiet moments of beauty I also found. I saw the intricate lacework, the exquisite detail of a hand-painted teacup, the profound connections within families, bound by tradition and duty. It's not all doom and gloom, you know. It's easy to romanticize the past, but living it is a different beast altogether. Speaking of beauty, let's address the inevitable, the absence of conveniences. Remember the endless trips to the outhouse in the middle of the night? Let's just say that made me incredibly grateful for indoor plumbing. It's those small things, those taken for granted luxuries of modern life that I miss the most. You don't value it until you're longing for it, do you? But what good is longing without a sense of perspective? My perspective is warped, I'll be honest. I see this era with both modern eyes and a slowly adapting Victorian mindset. I see the injustice, the inequality, but also the strength, the resilience, the unwavering spirit of the women who paved the way for the rights I once took for granted. My feminist ideals are stronger than ever. Key takeaway: the past holds both beauty and hardship, offering invaluable lessons for the present. The question that haunts me, of course, is whether I'll ever return. Is this my new reality? Will I fade into the tapestry of Victorian England, becoming a footnote in someone else's history book? The thought is unsettling, like being trapped in a beautiful, albeit restrictive, snow globe. You can admire the scenery, but you can't escape the glass. From the fear of the future to the warmth of hope, I can still use what I know. Could I use my knowledge of future inventions, of medical advancements, to subtly nudge things in a better direction? It's a dangerous game playing with time. But isn't it more dangerous to stand idly by, knowing what's to come? Maybe this is exactly why I'm here. Speaking of dangerous games, let's not forget the social minefield. Navigating the intricate rules of etiquette, the unspoken expectations of a woman in 1860. One wrong word, one misplaced glance, and you could ruin your reputation. Victorian society was a tightrope walk where you were blindfolded. But what good is knowledge of the future if you can't adapt to the present? I've learned to hold my tongue, to choose my battles wisely. I've learned to see strength in quiet diplomacy, in subtle influence. Now I pick my battles with the grace of a well-dressed lady with perfect etiquette. Key takeaway: even within limitations, one can find ways to make a positive impact. And so, as the fire dwindles to embers, I find myself at a crossroads. I may never see the world I knew again, but I can choose to make this world, this time, a little better. I can learn from the past, embrace the present, and hope for a future where women have more agency, more opportunity, more voice. From this point on, I look at the future with a slightly different view. I can use my modern knowledge as a guiding light, subtly influencing those around me, planting seeds of change that will blossom long after I'm gone. I can be a catalyst, a quiet revolutionary within the confines of my new reality. Speaking of the new reality, let's see if I can make some friends along the way. I've learned to find solace in the friendships I've cultivated, the bonds I've forged with the women around me. They may not understand my quirks, my moments of anachronistic confusion, but they offer a sense of belonging, of connection that transcends time. They accept my flaws, like the fact that sometimes I misplace my umbrella. But what good is companionship without a purpose. I've started to share my knowledge, discreetly, of course, suggesting new farming techniques, advocating for better sanitation, subtly challenging the prevailing beliefs about women's education. If this doesn't work, maybe I'll make up some spells. Key takeaway: resilience and hope can flourish even in the face of uncertainty. Perhaps this wasn't a curse, but a strange, unexpected blessing. I have a chance to see history unfold, to witness the birth of a new era, to play a small part in shaping the future. And even if I never return to my own time, I can find peace in knowing that I made a difference, however small, in this one. Now, as the first rays of dawn begin to paint the sky, I find a quiet acceptance settling over me. The longing for the past is still there, but it's tempered by a sense of purpose, a sense of belonging. I am a Victorian woman, and I am ready to face whatever the future holds, armed with anachronistic wit and a determined spirit. From that perspective, I'm beginning to understand a greater purpose. It's a bittersweet realization, a blend of regret and acceptance, but it's also a source of strength. I am a woman out of time, but I am also a woman with a mission to make the world a little better, one small act of defiance at a time. Now, as this chapter closes and our journey through Victorian England comes to an end, I want to thank you for joining me, for sharing these quiet moments, these late-night reflections on history, on life, on the enduring power of the human spirit. May you sleep well, knowing that even in the darkest of times, there is always hope. Until our next historical adventure.